Well, hello again and welcome in. Wherever you are today, wherever you're listening from, I'm so happy to have you over to feast upon God's Word together. Get your plate ready today and take a seat. It's the 44, which is Matthew 4:4. Man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Let's eat. I want to welcome you back into the 44 today. I'm your host, Jed Yancey, and this is episode 43 of season 4 of the 44. This week, we here in Ocala were reading through Hebrews chapters 6 through 10. And while there is a lot in there, and my brain was really on overload this week on which direction to go this week, I landed on Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25 that read this way: "Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." And with that, let me start here with this. You ever had those seasons in your life where just getting out of the door on a Sunday morning felt harder than it ever has before? It may be that life has just worn you down and your bed seems a little bit better than being at worship, especially if it's cold and it's rainy outside. Maybe that the assembling together just feels different than it used to be, or maybe it's the crowd that's changed, or maybe it's you that's changed, or maybe that it is that you're in a spot where you quietly wonder if your presence even matters anymore. I mean, does it? Is anyone even really going to notice that I'm there and with them or not when it comes to our assembling together? And despite all of those maybe this or maybe that's, as well as many others I could have probably slung out there, I want to remind you of a truth today that cuts through all of those maybes. And it is this: keep showing up. Because every time you do, something happens, something seen as well as something unseen that God uses to strengthen his people, which also includes you. And as I go back and I consider first the context of this Hebrew letter as it relates to these verses in Hebrews 10, what we got are a bunch of people who understood a great number of those maybe this and maybe that's inside of their own circumstances, which was persecution and pressure from the culture and the times they're living in, and even pressure from their own families to not only not show up, but to leave their faith behind entirely. Their faith had become costly. And when faith gets costly, attendance or lack of assembling together and worshiping with the saints is one of those things that tends to kind of fall by the wayside and thin out. And so the writer steps in here and says, don't neglect meeting together, as is the habit of some. And that phrase there, as is the habit of some, is what really struck me in my reading this week. Because again, when you consider the historical backdrop of all of this and the writer's encouragement to keep pressing on and keep the faith and don't drift, it means that there were believers who had simply fallen out of the rhythm of being with their brothers and sisters in Christ. They didn't make one big decision to abandon their faith. They just kind of slowly stopped showing up to the point where it became habitual and became a routine of absence. And what was once the center of their week became an optional add-on to their life. And so the writer steps in here not to shame them or to slam them, or at least that's not the way that I read it or take it, but to kind of like shepherd them back. He says, don't neglect meeting together. And why? Because neglect leads to drift. And drift leads to distance. And distance from God's people eventually starts to feel like distance from God himself, which is a lot of the point of this letter altogether. Don't drift. Don't go back. Don't go away from it. And this warning here As I think about it again, I don't think this is being said in the same way we sometimes want to point to it. It's not meant to be harsh. It's meant to be hopeful for the people it was written to, because what the writer is really saying is, listen, don't let absence become your new normal. Don't let isolation become your default setting when things get hard. Don't let it become your new rhythm, because when you isolate, discouragement grows even louder. And the reality of drifting starts to really set in right there. But when you gather, even when you're weary and even when you're tired and even when you're exhausted, that right there is where faith starts to build and starts to breathe again. And so I want you to think about it like the early church, didn't have these, polished programs or big productions. They just had each other. And that in and of itself was like more than enough. This common love and this common belief and this togetherness they had in Jesus. They sang about it. They shared, they prayed, they broke bread, they carried each other's burdens. And that's why the writer pleads, don't stop meeting. Don't make that a habit, because where you stand right now, for them, your faith is already faltering. Your faith cannot be built back and moving forward in isolation and neglect and drift, but it can be built up and strengthened in community and in assembling together with the saints. And I think that drives home a valuable point for us, because while it's easier now and faster than ever now than it ever has been in the history of the world to get where we want to go and to get to other places, we don't think much about just showing up. And to us, it seems like such a small thing and menial task. What we need to get here is that our presence is no small thing. And instead, it's a really big part of how God keeps his people standing in faith and moving forward. And I think a lot of the time we don't even realize how just showing up is so much more than just showing up. And that's, and that what we're really doing is, I guess in essence, joining in this spiritual rescue mission of sorts, not only for ourselves, but for others. Because every time I show up or we show up, it's a reminder that you and I belong to something that's so much bigger and so much greater than our feelings and what we're presently going through. And maybe right there is the hidden beauty of this, right? That when we keep showing up, it's not just for us. Because the moment you step through the door, you've already brought something with you that someone else needs, and that is you. You see, gathering isn't just about being present. Today's episode about showing up isn't just about filling up a seat. It's about being purposeful in that. And that's what this verse right before what we just read is all about, because it reads this way: let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good deeds. And that word consider there means to study carefully. In other words, don't just stumble into encouragement and stirring people up, but plan on it. Be purposeful and intentional about it and show up and do it. And when I think about that word plan, I don't know how your life operates, but man, when it comes to mine, Miss Megan sure is good about keeping me on schedule with our shared planner, which I still don't do good with. She plans meals, we plan vacations, we plan pickups and appointments and kids practices and where we got to be and when we got to be there and what we're going to do when we get there, all the things. And I'm assuming that all of you listening do the same. But when is the last time you planned out or considered how to encourage someone? When's the last time I considered how to stir someone else to love and good deeds? I mean, what if every time we came together, we entered with the quiet prayer that sounds like this: Lord, help me see who needs some stirring today. Help me to see who needs some encouragement today, because maybe it's one of the widows that's sitting alone, or that's the teen that's on the back row. Maybe it's the mom that's barely holding it together and holding on. You see, when we walk in and we show up looking for who to lift up, the church shifts from a place to attend to a family to strengthen and to encourage. And that, I think, is at the heartbeat of Hebrews 10. Not passive attendance and showing up for the sake of attendance and checking a box, but active participation. Not getting encouragement, but giving it. And somehow in that giving, what's interesting is God always finds a way to refill the giver and for you to be stirred up in the process of stirring up and encouraging others. But notice the contrast here that the writer makes in Hebrews 10, that some had fallen into the habit of neglect and of staying away, while others were building the habit of encouragement and stirring one another up. Both are habits, but both lead in opposite directions. And that's why the next verse reminds us, don't grow weary in showing up, because this rhythm of gathering, this habit of hope and this habit of encouragement is what keeps us anchored as the day draws near. And what a contrast that is, right? Like, instead of forming the habit of absence and isolation and neglect, form the habit of encouragement and of showing up and of assembling together. And so, as you very well know, probably over the course of your life and your experiences, absence can absolutely become a habit, but so can presence. Every time you show up, you're reinforcing a rhythm of hope and the rhythm of worship, of rhythm of hearing the word and of being known and knowing others. And just real quick, it seems to me, as I read this, that there's an urgency in these words, as he says, do this all the more as you see the day approaching. And so the writer, of course, is speaking to the day of Christ's return, which brings to light this reminder that our time is so short, and each and every gathering together matters more than we think. And you just never know when your presence will be the very thing that God uses to bring someone back from the edge of giving up. Therefore, we should never underestimate the power of just simple, ordinary faithfulness that looks like showing up. When you show up week after week, even though you're tired and even though you're uncertain, you're still testifying that despite your circumstances, that Jesus is still worth showing up for. And so are Jesus' people. But again, let me go back to the beginning and get honest, because some seasons of our lives make showing up really hard. Remember all those maybes at the beginning? Maybe hurt, maybe overlooked, maybe that you just don't feel the connection that you once did. And God sees that. He's not asking you to pretend it's easy, but he's inviting you to stay near the fire long enough to feel the warmth again. And honestly, as I think about this episode and I think about me, I know there are times where I've not been able to sing. And in that case, sit and listen. Maybe you can think of times where you've shown up and you just can't speak or you just can't sing, and yet it's still important for us to be there. And sometimes your presence is prayer enough, because even when your strength feels gone and the world is sapping all of the energy out of you, you're showing up as saying, God, I still believe you are right here, and you can do something extraordinary through something simple like showing up. And so your 44 today is the title of the episode. Keep showing up. Show up when it's exciting. Show up when it's ordinary. Show up when you have all the answers. And show up when you have nothing but questions. Because God does some of his best work in us and through us when we're gathered together. In those moments, he binds up the broken, he restores the weary, he fills up the lonely, and he renews hope in places where hope once died. And often, he does the extraordinary through ordinary people like me and like you. But we gotta show up. Thank you all so much for listening today. I'm praying you all have a great rest of the week, and that whoever you are and wherever you're listening from, that you keep showing up. I love you guys, and until next week, keep on eating.